Welcome to a very interesting revenge story from Brigadoon Rosefall, where OP and her big bro expose a poster couple who had been collecting money in the name of church. Farm folk vs. city crew. Hello all. My nieces and nephews have decided I, as the cool auntie, must master this thing called Reddit with stories of my youth. I hope you all enjoy seeing the story written out as much as they've enjoyed hearing it over the years. To start this story, I need to explain a bit about where it happened. My grandfather owned a 150-acre plus forest campground property with over a dozen buildings on the property. These buildings ranged from the common rooms, ceremony hall, barn, 18 different cabins, and a few other buildings one might find on a beautiful campground. This was used as a venue for all sorts of company retreats, wedding events, camps, or getaway. Anytime a camp was run that was used horses, my grandpa enlisted the help of the grandkids. He had gotten his fill of screaming and shouting kids, or excitedly shrieking women, or men who thought they knew best when it came to horses by the time I came along. One event happened when I was about 11 years old. I was helping out with the Girl Scouts guided tour on one of the trail rides when I noticed the smell was wrong in the air. I had us all turn back while the den mother tried to harp on about how I was cutting their trail short. I lied and said one of the horses had a bad limp and we needed to turn back right away. All of the girls were worried about the horse in question, and the rider offered to walk next to her horse all the way back. I said he'd be okay, but we needed to turn back now. Well, when we made it out of the thick forest trail, where the trees weren't blocking us in, we could see what made me and the horses so uneasy. Smoke. Loads of smoke was coming up the mountain. The worst place for a fire to be is under you on the mountain. I knew the property. I'd grown up riding and climbing all over it. I ordered everyone to give their horse their head and let them bolt back to the barn. The barn had a large open arena that was just plain dirt. It would last until we could get them down to the fire station. I let everyone ride hard past me. These girls were barely clinging to their horses, and I was worried that someone might fall off if I was completely honest. Well, we made it back to the arena without any real issues. A lot of the girls were crying. One of my older brothers assured us that everything was all right and told the girls they would be earning a few extra badges today. They'd sign off on them and everything, which got the girls to brighten up a lot. Now, the fire hadn't spread too far onto Grandpa's property just yet. I knew of the large water tanks, had to join in cleaning them before, but I never understood how exceptional the water tanks really were. That day, I got to see my grandpa's water storage almost choke an entire forest fire. The 5 small tanks, 30,000 gallons, were accessed at key spots with the fire department. The 3 medium tanks, 65,000 gallons, were put onto a sprinkler system that absolutely soaked everything on the property, turning it to a thick mud. Even the gravel and cement pathways were covered in mud. However, the 2 large tanks, 120,000 gallons, were being used with the firefighting helicopters. To a child, it felt like you were in the middle of the war zone. I was scared as I tried to keep the Girl Scouts and the horses calm when the firecopters flew overhead to refill at the main large one. By the end of it, the fire was out. The Girl Scouts got 5 badges ranging from fire safety to leadership, and everyone was safe. The cleanup for the fire took 2 weeks, a lot of pressure washing, and a lot of backbreaking labor. Now, on to the main reason I'm here, to tell the story of petty revenge. On Grandpa's property, there were beautiful trails, a gorgeous vista that had almost no light pollution, and plenty of reasons to hike, explore, and book us for events. Grandpa was protective of these venue spots because if he allowed people to walk freely, people wouldn't pay for the use of them. So he made sure to follow the letter of the law, marking it as private property, and would chase people down if they violated it. One person in town hounded Grandpa for use of the property for free because Grandma attended the church. She demanded Grandpa give them free use of the property for every book study, every little event. However, she wanted to charge an admission that would go right back into the church that her husband was one of the pastors too. To say Grandpa did not enjoy this money, grubbing woman, was an understatement. He wasn't a churchgoer, but to keep the peace with his wife's church, he would host free events once a year or so for this church's youth. A free event to come up, be fed for a 3-day weekend, interact with the horses, go on trail ride, and go fishing in the river or in the big pond on the property. He would host 3 a year for the children in the valley, depending on their age. He would also enlist his kids and grandkids to help out with the events to save on costs of running them. Well, after doing this for 5 years, it came out when I went to the church that she had been charging families almost $300 for the sake of going to the church. I had gone with my oldest brother, who they assumed was my dad, and tried to sell him on the event. My brother's face went red and he asked for further confirmation on the dates and the event itself. He agreed to think about it, and the woman went on to badger another family. They offered sponsorships that allowed the kids to go up for a discount too. She was squeezing every last penny out of her fellow churchgoers. My brother and I had been there to talk to the head pastor, not this woman's husband, about him visiting our grandmother since she was bedridden due to her old age. Mid-sermon though, my brother stood up after whispering to another woman to ask if the one hosting the service was the husband to that woman or not. When she had confirmed that he was, my brother stood up. This was not our church. No one here knew us. My brother had a voice that could fill up a space while talking at a normal tone. So when I heard him suddenly speaking after standing, I was surprised myself. You can imagine the look on over 200 people's faces as a stranger stood up and interrupted a sermon. Brother, I'm surprised you're able to stand up on that stage and speak of honesty to these people. You and your wife are crooks and thieves. You've been stealing from them for who knows how many events. I'm curious how far down the rabbit hole your theft goes. Pastor, excuse me, sir. What are you talking about? Brother, my grandfather runs the horse camp all the kids are attending this coming weekend. He's never charged any of the kids or their families a cent for using it. He knows how hard it is to attend fancy camps. He had to pay for all of his kids. He hated having to come up with so much money all the time. He hosts a free event for the kids. His grandkids help him run the event. I should know, I'm the stable master during the event. You could have heard a pin drop. The pastor's face turned a few shades of red, and then a woman stood up a few rows back from us. Woman, what do you mean? He doesn't charge. This woman looked ready to breathe fire, and I noticed this woman had 5 children with her. She looked ready to start a riot, as my brother nodded. Brother, my granddad knew firsthand how hard it was to come up with funds and how much going to different places affected his kids and helped them grow. He pays for their food. He lets them use the horses, has his family teach them about horses, and hey Daniel, remember me? One of the older kids had been staring at my brother from this woman as he confirmed that my brother worked at the event. Everything broke out into screaming and shouting at that point, and it took us hours to sort everything out. The pastor's wife had gone missing during this screaming match. It came to light the pastor thought his wife, who headed the organization, would give all the funds off to my grandpa. She never put them into the church even. Things got a little crazy as everyone realized she was gone, and the weight of the scam she'd pulled off on them. Each event hosted around 20 to 25 children. People would donate money to help get the kids of families with less funds there too. So we're not sure how much under the table money was given for that goal, but we do have an estimate on how much she got away with. $105,000 was the estimated she got away with before vanishing into the night. To say it was confusing was an understatement for me. I just wanted to go back home and keep an eye on the horses. My oldest brother's fury was nothing compared to anger my grandpa felt. He was so angry about all of it, and only allowed the head pastor to come up and visit his wife. No one else. He was bitter, but at his wife's request, he wouldn't let his bitterness affect the kids. We hosted the events as planned, and Grandpa's bitterness grew as we went from having 25 as our max to almost 50 per session. Every bed was filled in the camp beds, every bunk stuffed, and all of our hearts felt raw. I was a kid, and I felt cheated, but I refused to let that show trying to follow Grandpa's example. I failed miserably a few times, I'm sure of that, but I did try. Well, now we're onto the revenge part of the story. All of the above happened in the lovely era of internet is a thing. How new. Grandpa had his venue listed in the yellow pages if that dates us at all. I had turned 20. And Grandma's health, which had been in steady decline over the past few years, had really crashed hard. Her end was getting close. Grandpa asked me to help with her and the events going on because he was in no way ready to visit with people at all. So I balanced taking care of her needs and Grandpa's needs with running the venue through the booked events. On the website we had, I removed all the information and wrote a message that stated, "Due to current conditions, only previously booked events are on the schedule. Thank you. We'll be up and running again after the events conclude." It was the nicest way I could think to put, my grandparents aren't able to handle people at the moment. Please leave us all alone. Well, while in with the pastor in town, after tending to things for almost 5 months, my truck broke down. Unfortunately for me, the auto shop needed a part from another city, and it would take a few days to get there. I asked a family member if he could tow me to the shop over there, and he offered to have his wife drop off their car so I could get back to work with Grandma, and he'd take care of my truck. I politely refused. I desperately needed a break. Even just a ride to another town 30 minutes away would get me away from the suffocating feeling with them. They agreed and took me over to get my truck fixed. Now, the shop owner said it would be about 3 hours to fix it, and I could wander around town. I told my family member I was good. He could head out and I'd call if I needed more help. He gave me a hug and told the auto shop he'd pay for the repair. I needed a break and I appreciated that. Family helps family is our family creed. So I got to wander around a town I never really got to, trying to find a good place to get some food for lunch. When I made it to a restaurant, I noticed a very well-made flyer in a window. It talked about an upcoming meteor shower and how beautiful it was going to be. It reminded one about how the next town over's light pollution was going to eclipse the beauty of God's sparkling show. It talked about an event being held up on the mountain, where parking would be $20 for a breathtaking view of the sky, weather permitting. I smiled a little as I read the flyer and then did a double take. The flyer was boasting about a certain vista, a vista only available on Grandpa's land. I wrote down all the info on the flyer and told myself I would call as soon as possible. I went into the shop to get food and wondered if I'd messed up and completely forgotten an event or not. Well, turned out I hadn't when I got home and double-checked everything. We had parking for maybe 40 cars max, so I was curious where the cars would be parked. I decided to call with an out-of-state cell phone, thanks to an uncle and aunt who were visiting Grandma when I got back with my truck. Host, hi, how can I help you? Me, hi, I found your flyer. Oh my gosh, it sounds like so much fun. I mean, the stars in town are like 1,000% better than anything in my area. Are they really so pretty up on the mountain? Host, oh yes. It's one of the best places to watch the stars in our area. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. Me, but I'm worried about how many people are going to be going. Parking us. My car's not going to I don't know, end up with dirt on it, is it? Host, oh, no worries about that. We have premium parking for $40, but the $20 is parking in a pasture. Me, the entrance fee is by car. Do we need another type of fee? Host, oh yes. A $5 fee per person will also be needed. Make sure to bring cash for parking and your entrance fees. We'll have food carts too. I was shaking at this point in anger at this woman. I had checked the schedule and I knew no event was going to be happening. The campground had been abandoned a bit. All of the horses moved to my cousin's place at the base of the mountain, and I was taking care of Grandma and Grandpa at their cabin on another property on the same mountain, closer to the hospital and all. Me. All right, I'll be there. Thanks so much. I hung up after the goodbyes and started to shake in anger. I knew the property was closed down, and we'd had issues with someone breaking into the property. I had been trying my best to manage the events, the venue, and Grandma and Grandpa. She had mentioned that a pasture would be parking for everyone, and I wondered which one it would be. Then I realized it was time for the soil to be tilled and smoothed for the horses. I also realized something that I could do that would be wonderfully evil. I asked my visiting family if they wouldn't mind keeping an eye on Grandma and Grandpa, and I sped off to visit a family member. This particular man had married one of Grandma and Grandpa's daughters and adored the family and worked as part of the fire department for our area. I came in with all the information I had and told him my plan. I signed the documents and he put the information away at the back of a drawer and gave me the okay to go with my plan. I tilled the pastures, all of them. I churned up the dirt and then smoothed it out, making it look like such an inviting slab of land to park on. I then left all of the gates wide open. I didn't want anyone breaking locks, and I knew this was going to happen one way or another. Now, if you've ever tilled the soil, you know the ground is soft. That's what plants need in order to grow. Hard soil will kill your plants almost as fast as overwatering or crows. The day before the event, I was in the main parlor getting some water when I noticed a car coming up. They sped up, and who stepped out but the pastor's wife I'd seen all those years ago, and another woman from the same church. It dawned on me then that this was a con they were using, and I wondered how many times they'd used the campgrounds before. I saw red. I hid and watched as they knocked on doors, checked all over the place for any signs of life, and then started to talk excitedly as they sped off. I made sure my grandparents were well looked after as I kept lurking in the campgrounds and waiting. They came back the next day, the day of the event, and brought a line of porta pots, a hand-washing station, and a few food vendors that got set up. They turned on the footlights to the wedding vista, and I felt my blood just about boil. I could have called the cops then for trespass, but I had a much bigger plan in my mind for these nasty women. I waited. I waited until I saw cars lining the pastures, 3 pastures worth of cars, the driveway crammed so tight with cars that I was amazed at how many fit. The gravel drive was even being used, And so was the cement area by the barn. I hadn't realized how big asterisk this event was really going to be, and instantly started to worry about my plan. There were so many people, but I had followed the letter of the law with help from my family. I had posted the private property and the closed for maintenance signs up all over the place. I was so nervous as I saw so many people going up the path, but resolved that my plan was foolproof. When the food vendors turned off their lights, I knew it was time. Everyone was blocked in and up at the vista. I started with the pastures. That lovely soil plus the sprinkler system quickly became a muddy sinkhole that stuck all the cars up to the tires or doors. I went all out. I turned on every fire sprinkler on the property. I knew the vista was getting a proper soaking too. Everything was. I had started with the pastures first, and with sprinklers that could douse a fire, it did everything I remembered as a child. It flooded the pastures, it made the driveways impassable, it washed out part of the road for anything other than off-roaring trucks or vehicles. With over 100 cars in the pastures, I was gleeful as I heard people coming down the path. I shut off the sprinklers after 10 minutes, while everyone tried to figure out what was going on. People were calling the police, emergency services, screaming and confusion everywhere. The two women's car, I had taken great delight in letting the air out of the tires and adding extra water under. The car was sunk pretty deep. Well, my work was done. I hiked out and down the hill and left to go back into town. The police made it up by the time I'd already gotten back to Grandma and Grandpa's place. I was found there, and family vouched that I had been there the entire night when the police showed up. I explained to the police I wouldn't be caught up on the campground tonight, especially not with a fire safety test going on. We were to test the water tank's pressure by running them on an automatic timer for 10 minutes, and then measuring the water missing from the tanks in a few days when things settled and were passable. They wanted to know about the event, and we said we weren't hosting any events at all. Why would we? When we told the police department almost a month prior, the campground was closed until further notice. The two women who had hosted the event were caught and charged with trespass and a whole mess of other things, including reckless endangerment. The firemen produced the permit too, to test the fire tanks. After all, they were paramount to the running of the fire department. They had 2 helicopters that would fill at those stations after all, and they needed to make sure that each pump could push out 100 gallons per minute after all. The women had to pay for tow services, damage the towing caused to the property, hotels and inns for the people who were stranded, and didn't have someone else to come pick them up, and a ton of legal fees. The woman from the church had been wanted for her previous crimes and had been living at this woman's house, helping her to run similar scams all over the country by using out-of-season abandoned properties for their scams. I don't have too much information on the end of it all, because unfortunately at the time it was wrapping up, Grandma passed away. I do know that all profits from the scams had been sunk into fixing the damages and repaying for the crimes. It cost a lot to dig out the cars that got stuck in the mud. I hope you all enjoyed my tale of revenge. I did not expect it to be so long to write up, but then when I tell the story to family and friends, they all know the campgrounds, so I don't have to go into that. The revenge was really satisfying and was executed masterfully. OP's clear planning revealed the true nature of the scammer poster and his wife, who were making fools of people. The OP and her brother left the duo ashamed and red-faced. It was really cool to see the exposure of the posters who were making money in the name of the church. I would just say the revenge was really cool, satisfying, and whatnot. Let's not move on to the next story from Mang_Bang. 5,489. Neighbors refused to be quiet, so I played the long game and made them move out. A few years ago, I got hired at a job in a big city with expensive rent. I slept on my brother's couch for a few months while I struggled to find a place, but eventually found someone in an old building who wanted to get out of their rental agreement. The apartment was pretty close to work and in a nice area, so I took it, almost too good to be true. It didn't take long for me to realize I made a big mistake. The building was old, and the walls were made of plaster. Any sound reverberated like crazy. I could hear people cough and sneeze like they were standing in my place. What's worse, I shared one of these thin walls with my neighbors, who were absolutely insane. They just would not shut up. I would hear a man and woman argue constantly, often until 2 or 3 in the morning. And by arguing, I mean literally screaming and shouting and throwing things against the wall. When they weren't arguing, they were always just loud, shouting and whining at each other like little kids constantly. Pretty much the quintessential toxic, obnoxious couple. And the shit they would argue about was so stupid. I remember hearing an argument about whose turn it was to steal shampoo from the drugstore. One time the boyfriend decided to yell, "The Bible says what the Bible says," over and over again for some reason. Almost every day, it would be something different and uniquely annoying. The first real incident happened when I was woken up by screaming and banging against my wall at 1 a.m. I did what I usually did, blasted Kenny G through my speakers at the wall until they shut up. But this time, it didn't work. The banging got louder, so I stopped the music, but then it got worse and sounded like a fight. It was hard to describe, but it sounded like the woman was getting beaten up. At this point, I was more concerned than mad, so I called my superintendent, who told me to call the police. The police came, the neighbors told them everything was fine. The police left, it was quiet, I went back to bed. Literally the next night, I am woken up again at 1 a.m. by my neighbors having another argument. This time, I heard a boom. Then the woman says, "Oh my God," in a weird voice, and then banging, and what sounds like someone being strangled. The noises were freaky, and way more concerning than even last time, so I called the police again. The police came, the neighbors told them everything was fine again. The police left again, and it was quiet again. But this time, the police called me back, and basically told me I was an idiot for wasting their time. They said there was no evidence of any fight, and both neighbors denied anything even happened. Even the superintendent said that no one else on the floor complained and intimated that I was starting to become a nuisance. I decided from this point forward, I was going to go full Spielberg with video evidence. The noise was bad for the next 6 months, and I would get woken up at least once a week after midnight by yelling and screaming. I made a few written complaints, a few videos as evidence, and sent them to the property manager. There was enough to serve them an eviction notice and go to the landlord-tenant board, but somehow the property manager f***ed up the date for the hearing, and it never actually took place. Thankfully, the noise stopped anyway, for now. So I assumed the neighbors finally got the message and would be quiet from now on. I didn't fight for another hearing, because the eviction notice gave the neighbors an opportunity to be quiet, which they sort of did. As an aside, the video evidence I gathered during this time was beautiful. I was pleasantly surprised that my phone was very good at picking up their voices. It got to the point where I would get excited when I was woken up in the middle of the night, because I would run out into the hallway and film their door and room number as the noise blasted out and echoed down the hall. I gathered some damning unambiguous evidence, pure gold, and it was all time-stamped at around midnight or 1 a.m. But because the hearing got cancelled, I didn't get to present my evidence, at least not yet. For a few months, everything was reasonably okay. They were still loud as f*** during the day. And there were a few times after 11 p.m. on weeknights where I went to their door and asked them to keep it down. But other than that, things were mostly better, and I was starting to be able to relax in my place for once. Yet again, it was too good to be true. One day around 2:30 in the afternoon, I start hearing this weird high-pitched screeching coming from my neighbor's place. And it doesn't stop for hours. I'm sitting on my couch trying to figure out what it is. It sounds like a giant tropical bird moved in next door. Well, it turns out, after all the shit we went through a year ago with the noise complaints and eviction notice, my neighbors decided it would be a good idea to get a dog. And of course, these obnoxious couldn't just get a quiet, normal, well-behaved dog. They had to get a completely untrained, 4-month-old, tiny yappy Pomeranian that was incapable of being quiet. This thing would yap and screech and bark over and over and over every day for hours. While I'm still coming to terms with how miserable my life is about to become, I get a note under my door. On it, my neighbor writes that she just got the dog as an emotional support animal for her mental health and asks the whole hallway to please try to tolerate the noise. I'd already been living next to and listening to these neighbors scream at each other for over a year. They were confirmed morons, two insane, toxic in a mutually abusive relationship. I knew with certainty that they weren't capable of taking care of this dog properly, and the noise situation would go to complete. And regarding the mental health, I was going through my own troubles during this time, in part due to lack of sleep, and was seeing a therapist. The last year of complaints should have made it clear to anyone that noise was a problem for me, especially getting woken up at night. Of all the things this neighbor could have chosen to help their mental health, they chose the most obnoxious thing possible. They knew getting a loud dog was going to be a problem, and they did it anyway. It was time for war. I realized if I wanted this noise to stop, or to be even taken seriously, I needed a mountain of evidence against my neighbors. I researched the evictions process and everything that was required. I checked the forms my superintendent would have to send out for an eviction notice. I read threads on Reddit about slumlords and neighbor disputes. It became clear to me the only way to win was to be religiously disciplined both in gathering evidence and refusing to retaliate. I became a noise complaint monk, taking a vow of disciplined log-taking and relying on mantras like, "Shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up." Once I submitted my first written complaint, things got bad. My neighbors flipped out when they realized I was complaining again. I heard stuff like, "Of all the apartments in, we have to live next to this for a few days." Then the loud arguments in the middle of the night started all over again, and one of the neighbors got into the new habit of slamming their chest of drawers against my wall at 2 a.m. The barking also got much worse. The emotional support animal letter said that the barking would get better once the dog was trained, but from what I could hear, my neighbors' methods of training began and ended with screaming at the dog, just like they screamed at each other each day. "No, bad dog! Be quiet! Shut the f*** up!" Came through my wall in new and varied combinations every day, and every time an argument started between my neighbors, the dog would always join in, even in the middle of the night. The constant level of noise was insane. For over a year, Elle logged every instance of yelling, shouting, and barking coming from my neighbor's apartment. It didn't matter if it was after 11 p.m. or not at this point. I was trying to demonstrate how I can't get peace at any time of day. And when I say every instance, I mean I had minute-to-minute logs of every loud noise and every word I heard from my neighbor's wall. If I was woken up in the middle of the night, it went in the log. If I heard the dog bark from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. on February 2nd, it went in the log. If I heard someone yell, "You peed on the floor again," at the dog, it went in the log. Honestly, it sucked, and made me almost lose my mind. But by the time I was done, I had pages and pages of notes. Obviously, written logs wouldn't be enough. I already had a decently fat stack of video evidence to demonstrate the true character of my neighbors, but I needed current evidence if there was going to be another hearing. Spielberg. Now I was Coppola in the heart of darkness. I got more videos of screaming and shouting coming out of their door. I got videos of banging and barking against my shared wall. I got videos of screaming, shouting, banging, and barking all at the same time, or in any combination. I had amassed a war chest of video evidence to be deployed at the next available hearing, but I was getting war-weary. At this point, I was like 6 or 8 months into the complaints process, and I could barely take it anymore. I was getting woken up like 2 nights a week and would be a zombie at work. I complained about my neighbors at work often. I was finding it harder and harder to keep myself from blasting music, or banging on their wall, or kicking their door down. But I managed to stay strong, and I followed the eviction process like it was my religion. I sent in a second written complaint, then a third, which resulted in an eviction notice, which gave the neighbors an opportunity to be quiet. This time, they didn't give a fuck. If anything, they were louder than ever before. I was looking for other places to move into when I finally get good news from the property manager. There's a hearing date. There was light at the end of the tunnel, but once the neighbors heard about the hearing date, they did everything they could to fuck me up. There were no attempts to stop the barking anymore. It was constant. The screaming matches were back in full force, and when they started yelling and screaming, the dog would go nuts. It was just an insane amount of noise. And the drawers were ridiculous. Honestly, I never expected the slamming drawers to be that bad, but they easily eclipsed the barking and the shouting. They would slam and slam and slam the drawers over and over again against my wall. And because of the plaster, it would boom, 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 and echo through my whole place. These assholes were definitely doing it on purpose. 3 days before the hearing date, I go to bed at 9:45 p.m. At 10 p.m., I'm still not asleep, but I'm startled by boom boom of the drawers. I log it and go back to bed. At 11:30 p.m., I wake up to boom 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 again, and I'm pissed off. It takes me half an hour, but I fall asleep again. Then at 12:45 a.m., boom 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 boom. There it is again. I call my superintendent, tell her what's going on. The super calls them and tells them to stop. I fall back asleep. Then at 1:30 a.m., boom, boom, boom. I wake up super angry. It's obvious they're doing this on purpose to piss me off before the hearing and get a reaction out of me. I call the super again and go back to sleep again. Then at 2:45 a.m., boom, boom, boom. I can't take it anymore. I scream, "Do it again! Do it again!" I lost it. I couldn't help myself. My discipline broke. My superintendent calls me and tells me my neighbors just said I yelled a death threat through the wall. What the f***? And that they're calling the police. What the f***? Everything just feels now. I can't sleep, so I just wait until morning. No police show up and I go to work. I realized I couldn't even stay at my place anymore until this hearing was over, so I went back to my brother's couch for the next 3 days. Finally, the big day arrives. I gather my evidence. Over a year of meticulously logged noise complaints, 6 instances of video evidence. I cherry-picked the gold out of 20 good ones. The previous eviction notice the neighbors received, 4 written noise complaints, including the 2 from the previous eviction notice, a letter from my coworker about poor work performance due to lack of sleep, and even a letter from my therapist about how my neighbor's excessive noise was affecting my mental health. I got there and met the property manager and superintendent, who were there with the owner of the property management company and a slick-looking lawyer. I handed the lawyer all my evidence. I gave him a USB stick with the videos. I even handed over my big Bluetooth speaker to make sure the videos were loud enough to hear. Laptop speakers suck. I look over to my neighbors, and they are wide-eyed. They look scared. Finally, we all go into the landlord-tenant boardroom with everybody. The adjudicator first asks if anyone wants to mediate instead of going through with the hearing. My neighbor's hand immediately shoots up. I say in front of everybody, I don't want to mediate, but apparently it's not up to me and the lawyer takes me aside. The lawyer tells me if it goes to mediation, the neighbors and the property management create an agreement. For example, no more noise at X o'clock, and if that agreement is broken, once it results in an immediate eviction. He explains, if we go in front of the board, instead it's a 50-50th chance they either get evicted or get off completely. Obviously, mediation is the better way to go. I know these idiots are already incapable of keeping quiet, so I agree with the lawyer. We go out to find the neighbors and they're nowhere to be found. Turns out they opted for the free legal counsel. I wonder why, and won't be available until the afternoon. While waiting, I explained to the property manager, owner, and lawyer what happened a few days ago with the slamming drawers all night long. When I made my complaints before, no one really took them seriously, but today everyone is very interested in everything I have to say. The afternoon comes, and I'm excluded from the mediation meeting because it's between the neighbors, the lawyer, and the owner. I can't hear what they're saying, but I can hear my neighbors yelling and shouting from inside the room, so I know it's not going well for them. Everyone leaves the room and the lawyer comes up to me. He tells me the mediation failed, the neighbors refused to change their behavior, and won't accept any terms. The lawyer says they have to go in front of the adjudicator again. But by now, it's almost the end of the day. I wait another hour or two, and everyone comes out. I see my neighbors leave as the lawyer comes by again and explains. Apparently, after the mediation failed, the property management owner offered my neighbors 2 months rent-free if they agreed to move out in 2 months. The neighbors agreed, but when they all went in front of the adjudicator, the neighbors changed their minds and said no. And apparently a second offer was made, which they said yes to. And then no again, all in front of the adjudicator. They ended up running out of time, and the adjudicator cut the hearing short and said it would have to be resolved in a second hearing. I was disappointed, but the lawyer assured me that because of how capricious and insane my neighbors behaved during the hearing, they would almost certainly be evicted during a second hearing. I was dismayed that it wasn't over, but hopeful the end was coming soon. I also felt vindicated. It was finally clear to everyone that my neighbors were actually insane, and I wasn't just making this up. The next 2 months weren't as bad as before. I continued my long, steady march of logs and videos, but the noise definitely let up, especially the drawers. One day near the end of the second month, I started to hear insane barking. It would not stop. It went on for hours and hours and hours. I called the superintendent to complain when they told me it was probably because the neighbors were moving out today. Yes. Ha ha ha. Finally. Apparently, she couldn't tell me earlier because of privacy reasons. As they were moving out, I blasted "Na Na Hey Hey Kiss Him Goodbye" on loop, put in some earplugs, and took a 2-hour bath. My apartment is quiet now, and I can finally sleep. It wasn't exactly the satisfying, crushing blow I wanted, but my discipline paid off, and now I can live in peace. The revenge was kind of cool. Not that much, but cool and satisfying. The final scene, where OP plays the farewell song and the toxic neighbor was leaving, was really cool and satisfying. I can say, OP's struggle of evidence gathering finally paid off, and now he can sleep peacefully. By the way, I would give OP a selfish advice of changing his flat to a peaceful area instead of fighting for peace in a dysfunctional neighborhood.